Evening, folks. This is going to be a little chill live stream, a little pink noise we're making this evening. It's actually getting kind of late here on a Sunday evening, 9 p.m. in California, but we gotta respond to something. All right. Earlier this week, another audio reviewer, Lachlan, he does a channel called Passion for Sound, which is a good channel. You should check it out. I've got that linked in the description down below. Earlier this week, he published a video titled "All IEM Reviews Are Wrong," which is clearly clickbait, and I took the bait. I clicked it, but I didn't watch the full thing. And then I decided what I would do in response is make my own clickbait video in response. Ergo, you are here. Well, how's it going? Good evening. And I hope you don't feel totally clickbaited, because we are actually going to talk about this video and my response to it. I've had a number of people either in the comments on YouTube videos or even in Discord chat ask me about, like, you know, what's your response to this? So figure, I don't know, I can't just ignore the fact that some other prominent YouTuber is making content saying all IEM reviews are wrong as an IEM reviewer, right? I got to address it some way. And so I figured what I would do is I would finish watching the video together with you, and I'll respond to it in real time. Now, I will say up front, I referred to Lachlan's video as clickbait and my own video as clickbait in response. I watched enough of his video, just like kind of the intro, to get the gist of it. And as I expected, like, it's good content. So if you're not already a subscriber to Passion for Sound, again, check out the link in the description down below. I recommend you sign up to his stuff. Lachlan, I'm going to be restreaming your content. If you're mad about that, let me know. I'll take down the video or whatever. But I felt like this would be a good way for us to, I don't know, get a little bit of audio discourse going on. So, and then I guess I'll also call out, you know, if you happen to be on my Discord server, I've got a room open if you want to chat about this with me. Feel free to join in the middle of the stream. But otherwise, I think the bulk of what we're going to be talking about will be over here, responding to Passion for Sound. So yeah, like I mentioned, this is his channel. This is Lachlan's channel, Passion for Sound. If you've seen this guy around, you've seen his thumbnails. Look at this video. All IEM reviews are wrong. Look, I review IEMs not for a living, but I mean, as this is my hobby. You coming at me with my hobby? And again, spoiler. I've already listened to a bit of it. I know that it's not nasty clickbait or anything like that. It's a good topic. But actually, real quick, let me check the live chat and see if anything's going on in live chat before we click play on this and go. Lucker saying, OMG, Mark is going to get him. That's right. We're going to get Lachlan. What's up, base range? DNTR, how you doing? Get your obligatory dab all day. VX Ace, how's it going? Waris is asking, who's Lachlan? Lachlan is this guy. This is the guy that does the channel Passion for Sound. Very good audio channel, except for when he's calling out IEM reviewers like me. No, just kidding on that. Oh, interesting. It looks like X Zlacky has a bit of a take that I am not ready to respond to, because I have not watched the entirety of this video. And I will warn, this is kind of a long video. It's like 20 minutes long. I might watch it on like 1.5x speed or something like that, just so we can kind of get through it. And if you want to watch it at not 1.5x speed, again, I do have it linked in the description. I recommend giving him a view. I'm not trying to siphon off his traffic. I'm just trying to further the discourse in a way that I think would be entertaining. Yeah, JCap, you're saying I really like that guy's channel. Yeah, I do too. I like his stuff. All right, so without further ado, let's click into this video and start watching to find out why Lachlan thinks that all IEM reviews are wrong, including super reviews. What's going on here?
By the shape and size of our ear.
I was clicking around, so let me go back to the beginning.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Sound Decisions here on Passion for Sound. As you can see, this video is a little bit different.
Like I warned, I'm going to play this at like 1.5x speed, so if it sounds a little funky, I apologize, but we got to get through this somehow.
I'll be presenting to you some slides containing some information I've pulled out of an article. This is a research article I wanted to share with you that explains to you why I said in the title of this video that all reviews you've ever seen on IEMs are wrong. Now, technically, they're not exactly wrong, so it is a little bit of a clickbait title, but it's not entirely off the mark. I'll explain.
See, he admits that it's clickbait, which I appreciate. I'm also making clickbait. I hope he appreciates that.
Shortly, why you need to be really careful taking anybody's impressions of an IEM with anything but a grain of salt. I will also talk at the end of the video, though, about what you can do to get a better sense of which review. little bit of a clickbait title, but it's not entirely off the mark. I'll explain to you shortly why you need to be really careful taking anybody's impressions of an IEM with anything but a grain of salt. I will.
Okay, that real quickly, I do want to respond to a little bit. He said, why you should take anyone's impressions of an IEM with a grain of salt, effectively. I think that's true of pretty much all audio stuff. I get where he's going. I have a good sense of where he's going. And in fact, I've got a little diagram over here that maybe we'll dip into. That's kind of like my explanation for what I think he's about to talk about. But I would say that caveat that he just gave, I would apply to pretty much all audio reviews, if I'm perfectly honest.
Talk at the end of the video, though, about what you can do to get a better sense of which reviews you can trust and which you can't. And it's not about the intentions or the reliability or the validity of the actual reviewer. There's a lot more going on, and I'll talk about that in a second. Before I get into it, I do want to say a huge thanks to channel patron Nick, who's actually the one that shared this article in our channel Discord server. We've got a dedicated topic for sound theory where we talk about articles like this one and certain others. So if that's something you're interested in, you might want to jump onto Patreon and check it out for yourself. But for now, I just want to say a huge thanks to Nick for bringing this article to my attention. And the final thing I want to say before I get into the actual article itself is I just wanted to mention, you'll probably see this guy here. This is a Rode pod mic. And I want to say a huge thanks to Rode for sending it over. To be really clear, Rode didn't ask me to review this or anything like that. I contacted the person I've been dealing with at Rode and asked specifically if they had any recommendations for microphones, and they've been kind enough to send it over with no expectations at all. And that's why I specifically wanted to...
Sorry, what's up?
You're clear on both sides.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Wrecker. Wrecker's on the Discord.
Out. A, because I was on this occasion granted something for free, but also because...
All right, let's get past it.
This particular article is called Measurement Apparatus and Modelling Techniques of Ear Canal Acoustics, and it's been written by Marco Hipaka, I don't know if I'm saying that right, in November 2008. I've got the link here on screen, but I'll also put a link down in the description below so you can access this full article for yourself. There's a lot of content I'm not going to cover here in this video, so if you're interested in seeing more, do check out the link and read everything there is to know. It goes into all sorts of bits and pieces about how measurements are done, the structure and the anatomy of the ear, all sorts of bits and pieces, so there's lots of reading there. I'm only going to cover the bits that I think are particularly relevant to IEM reviews. And I'm going to start by pulling...
Convenient there. He's ignoring all the stuff that might apply to his reviews. No, again, this is fake beef. I don't actually,
quote directly from the article. And it says here, from our research, we may conclude that, and here's the key bit, the physical dimensions and especially the length of the ear canal have a considerable effect to the pressure frequency response of the eardrum. Now, what this means for us is that the different lengths of people's ear canals and the shape as well, that's going to directly affect how you hear an in-ear monitor, and potentially headphones and speakers as well, but particularly in-ear monitors, as I'll show you shortly. Before I dive into the data and the information that explains
see there
as well.
He admitted.
And what this means for us is that the different lengths of people's ear canals and the shape as well, that's going to directly affect how you hear an in-ear monitor, and potentially headphones and speakers as well. But
potentially headphones and speakers as well. Just keep that in mind. But yeah, I totally. The ear anatomy being different between humans is going to make a big difference in terms of how a thing that you stuff inside your ear is going to sound. Hopefully this gets into detail better than what my diagram is, but if push comes to shove, I'll pull up my diagram. I don't know if this is actually necessarily what I'll be talking about, but we'll
in-ear monitors, as I'll show you shortly. Before I dive into the data and the information that explains why it can affect how we hear IEMs, I just want to talk about the fact that this article also covers a whole lot more ground, as I mentioned earlier, and specifically some things it covers that I'm not addressing here is that we could also all have slightly different angles of our eardrums, and that's going to affect the sound slightly. Also, any tension on the eardrum could affect how we hear, and there are multiple causes for potential tension on the eardrum. And something else that he talks about is the fact that where the measurement is taken can also influence what the measurement shows.
This is all true. And just FYI, a lot of this is also true of headphone reviews, but in different ways. Just
specifically what they're talking about here is measuring the frequency response.
This is kind of a thing with standards, right? It's like standards of, let's say, decibel measurements of headphones. Like how loud does a headphone get? I believe like the standard is to measure it at 1 kilohertz. Like how loud is it at 1 kilohertz? But if you looked at the frequency response of most headphones, 1 kilohertz often is like kind of the quietest point in the frequency response. And then usually, let's say you had a V-shaped sound signature, you've got elevated bass and elevated treble. Ostensibly, the overall sound volume that's coming out of that is probably louder than that whatever is measured at 1 kilohertz. But it's just, this is kind of the nature of making standards and this sort of thing. I think to properly respond to this, I would probably should have prepared or something like that, but I would consider, I don't know, you just get into the details of what a standard really is, and you start to understand and really grasp how many assumptions that there are behind these things that we take for granted, right? Like measurements, whether they are things like sinad measurements, decibel loudness measurements, or frequency response measurements. They're all based on a bunch of assumptions that assume the average human being is XXX, right? And I'm not the average human being. You probably are not either. So they're still useful. Maybe this is the important thing. Measurements I still think are very useful, and as well are, impressions from other people are still useful, but they're not exact in the way that, like, if you're writing code, you can just copy paste something from Stack Overflow and it's going to work. It's going to have to interact with your own human ear at some point, at which case there are variables which were not accounted for in the standard.
At the ear, whether it's measured at the opening of the ear canal or at the eardrum, will affect what the end result is.
It's interesting to mention tension of the eardrum. I wonder what affects tension of the eardrum. What was it like? Is that something that varies? Is that just like person to person, or is that a thing that maybe varies throughout the day depending on environmental conditions? Did I just wake up? Was I sleeping? Is it cold outside? I wonder if all that stuff could affect it.
So what that says to us as well is that when you're seeing measurements of speakers where there is no ear canal potentially being used, it's just a microphone, that's going to be different to what you actually hear by the time it gets filtered by your ear canal. But it also means that if you're ever seeing measurements from a reviewer, for instance, where they might be using an in-ear microphone that sits right at the opening of the ear canal, that's not giving you a true representation of what's happening at the end of that person's ear canal, and specifically also at the end of your ear canal. And
yeah, that's actually really true. I've actually got a set of in-ear microphones here. Oh, one of them just popped out conveniently. And I've done some measurements with those things in my ears, wearing headphones on top of my ears to get a sense for what the frequency response is. But yeah, they sit on the outside of they sit in my concha, but outside of the ear canal. And the ear canal is going to have certain impacts on the frequency response that enters, like, think of your ear as like kind of like 3 stages, and frankly there's probably more, but there's like outside of the ear, there's inside of the concha, right, which is past the pinna, and then there's inside of the ear canal. All those stages, like those stages interact with the sound and warp it and change it in ways. When I'm measuring it with an in-ear microphone, I'm measuring it sort of like at the halfway point, because I don't have a microphone at my brand stem, unfortunately.
to say that people are doing it wrong, the point is there's no easy way to get it right because everybody's different. And let's look at that now. So one of the things that this article points out is that the pinna, that's this flappy bit on the outside of the ears, the pinna works differently for low and high frequencies. So sound waves with a frequency below 1 kilohertz are not affected by the pinna, but above 1 kilohertz and especially around 2 to 3 kilohertz, which is where most speech signals come in, and that's, when I say speech signals, it's the key things that help to make the sounds of consonants, it's the way we form the individual sounds that make us intelligible. Those things are specifically boosted by reflections from the pinna. And I've got...
Okay. That's always been my understanding. I guess it's nice to hear that from ostensibly some scientific paper. I mean, I'm sure I heard it from somebody who read it from somewhere reliable, but that's kind of always been my understanding, is that the ear is responsible for amplifying parts of the frequency responses where, you know, you typically find things like speech, upper mid-range, and then the ear canal tends to amplify higher frequencies. So at least, again, that's my understanding. We'll see if that's backed up by this or not.
Theory here, and this is not talked about anywhere in this article, but what I'm wondering is if there might actually be some natural, biological and anatomical interactions between the shape and size of your pinna and my pinna and what's actually going on inside the ear canal. It's quite possible there are some effects where what is going to be filtered and boosted by the shape and size of our ear canal might be being offset a little bit by the pinna. And I say that because in my experience reviewing earphones and headphones and seeing comments, there seems to be much more range in what people hear from IEMs than there is from headphones.
Yeah, I think that point right there is totally right. I'm not sure I totally follow exactly how he was framing that question, but specifically the point about there being more variability in terms of how people perceive IEMs versus the variability in terms of how people perceive headphones, that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know that it's because my pinna is somehow... the size of my pinna is somehow affecting how my ear canal resonates, but again, I think of it as like kind of like 3 stages. And with a headphone, you're starting, you know, kind of in stage 1 outside of the ear. With an IEM, you're starting in stage 2. You're past the concha and into the ear canal, which is now kind of going almost into stage 3,
So
actually.
by extension, what I'm thinking about that is that maybe when we're putting on a pair of headphones, we're getting both the benefits of the pinna and the ear canal, and maybe they're balancing it out so all of us hear them more similarly.
Yeah,
Whereas when
I
we've got
think
an
I think
IEM,
that's
we're
about
not
right.
getting any of the effect of the pinna, and that could be why there's a much broader variation when we're just listening to earphones. Now, if none of that makes sense, don't worry too much about it. It's just a theory I'm playing with. This video is much more focused on the IEMs when the pinna is taken out of the picture, but I did think that this was interesting, that the pinna is definitely involved in affecting how we hear certain frequencies.
Okay, just maybe real quick worth zoning in on this diagram of an ear. And if you're watching a mobile, this is probably really small, and I apologize. But basically, it's got kind of like a 2D cross section of an ear. As we're describing these different parts of an ear, dear viewer, here, I'll use my own ear as a demonstration, right? We've got the pinna, right? When we talk about the pinna, we're talking about this thing, this fleshy bit on the outside. This is the part that we're talking about as kind of acting as a horn and amplifying frequencies in like the 1 to 3, 4 kilohertz range. And then past that, you've got, well, let's see, you've got, you know, the hole, right? The hole inside of the pinna is generally referred to as the concha. And then past the concha is where you have the ear canal. Where exactly all those begin and end, well, again, those are more scientific standards, and probably depends on definitions. We're not getting into that today, though.
Now though, let's look at the ear canal, because that's the bit that's really relevant for IEMs. Before we dive into the data, it's worth getting a quick visualization and understanding of the anatomy of the
So
ear
he wants
canal,
to zoom in
because we're going to talk a
specifically
lot
on
about that
the
with some of the different measurements.
ear canal portion.
And the key thing here that I've highlighted from this quote is that there are 2 more or less pronounced bends within the ear canal itself.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And so an ear
before.
canal is
First
not a
bend
straight
and the
tube.
second bend.
Firstly, it's worth noting that every single person has a couple of bends in the canal that may be more or less pronounced. There can be compressions in the canal, so it can get narrower or wider at certain points. And then also the length of the canal can be different. All of these factors come into play to affect how we hear specific sounds. And so let's now start looking at some of these measurements and talk about what they mean for us. As the quote at the top of the page here talks about, the ear canal acts as what they call a quarter wavelength resonator. And so that means that it will actually pick up and resonate.
A quarter wavelength resonator. Oh my God. We got a new title of this video. This video is now titled Quarter Wavelength Resonators.
Therefore boost sound waves that are 4 times the length of the ear canal. And one of the measurements they did as part of this research article was they took an ear canal where they could vary the length of it and took different measurements using wideband signals, so signals across multiple frequencies, to see where there were particular peaks or troughs in the sound that they measured. As you can see from...
All right, what's going on in this graph? Let's see. I know he's talking about it, but I feel like this is a pretty meaty slide. In an anechoic chamber, the length of the ADEX canal was adjusted with 1 millimeter steps from 0 to 30 millimeters. I mean, that sounds about right. Again, we're talking about ear canals anatomy. We're talking about pretty small stuff, right? 30 millimeters is not very long. But they're adjusting the length of this probably synthetic ear canal while measuring the pressure frequency responses with an eardrum microphone. Okay. And then it looks like this graph is only looking at the top end of the frequency response range, right? So this is starting here down at 1 kilohertz. The typical frequency responses that you'll see from me and Clinical, etc., they'll start at like 20 hertz. So this is missing basically all of the bass and the lower mid-range. And it's just looking at how the ear canal is interacting with frequencies from 1 kilohertz up to, I'm going to guess, 20 kilohertz. And then these different lines over here, and the key is saying like these are the different lengths of ear canal. So with a shorter ear canal at 12 millimeters, you've got this peak showing up here. I'm going to guess that's at around, it's not labeled very well. It looks like it's maybe like, let's call it 6-7 kilohertz. But then with a longer ear canal, 24 millimeters, that same peak moves all the way down here to, let's call it 5 kilohertz. I'm just guessing. It's not labeled, but it does have lines on it. And if I had the time to do math, I could probably figure that out, but I don't. All right, let's keep watching.
Graph here, we've got 4 different lengths. We've got 12 millimeters, 16 millimeters, 20 and 24 millimeters. And in each case, changing the length of the ear canal changed where there were resonant peaks. So for example, in the...
So this is maybe worth calling out, is this is a thing you can actually see in frequency responses of IEMs. Let me pull out actually an example of, is it the SSR that I did this with? Yes. So, here's a frequency response I made of SSR sample 2. And then Grolix in the Discord chat actually at one point asked me to measure it with a deep insert. So that's basically taking the IEM, inserting it deeper into the ear canal. And we're talking about the same ear canal. So we're not talking about changing literally the length of a person's ear canal, but we're talking about, you're effectively changing the length of the distance between the IEM and your ear. So we're effectively kind of doing that same sort of thing. And with the SSR deep inserted, let me make this a red or something so it's a little bit more obvious. Magic, come on. All right, you know what? That's close enough. And I'm actually going to guess this was SSR sample 1. Okay. So you can see when I insert the SSR deeper into my microphone to measure it, not only does that resonance peak that I normally line up here at 8K, not only does that resonant peak get deeper, right? It probably lined up a little bit past, looks like probably around 11K. It actually very significantly changes the frequency response of the treble above that, right? So rather than having a peak at 8K, you now have kind of a dip at 8K. And that can have a very significant difference in terms of how you perceive the sound. Now, what I will say is that there's no guarantee here that what I've measured is what you will hear if you deep insert an SSR. And I also wouldn't really recommend deep inserting an SSR. If you lose a tip inside your ear, I did not tell you to do that, okay? The other thing is that, again, we use this 8 kilohertz as kind of like a standard to try and make the measurements more comparable between each other. But if you were to wear the SSR and then do something like a sine sweep and find out where that resonance peak actually happens in your own ear, it might not happen at 8K. It might not happen at 11K. It might actually happen at like 6K. And that's not measured here at all. And in fact, so you can imagine taking this peak, moving it up here to 6K, and you might have a treble peak like this with the SSR. I'm just completely speculating what that would look like. And then it would probably have a pretty big dip afterward. So I guess I just pulled this up as kind of like to illustrate, this is effectively what Lachlan is talking about with these graphs, but this is maybe just in a form that's a little bit more familiar to you if you're familiar with looking at squig.link. Okay, back to the video.
4mm case, which was the green, there was a peak at around about just above the 3K mark. There was a peak, and then there was a secondary peak just below 10K.
And actually here, what's consistent too is, see, this is where as the ear canal length is getting longer, that resonance peak is moving further, it's moving lower in the frequency response range, right? And when we're talking about inserting this thing deeper, it's moving that resonance peak further up. Because effectively what we're doing by inserting the IEM deeper into the microphone is we're shortening the ear canal length. At least that would be my understanding.
That's telling us is that if you had an ear canal that was 24mm long, and in this case it was dead straight, you would hear a greater sense of energy and sound at just above the 3 kilohertz mark, and again just below the 10 kilohertz mark. In contrast to that, if you were somebody with a 12mm long ear canal, what you would find is that you would be more sensitive, i.e. you would hear more energy between 5 and 6 kilohertz, and then again, as we can see, it's starting to disappear off the page, but again up around the 12 kilohertz mark. And so all of this goes to show that every factor in the ear canal, so the length, the shape, the compression, as we'll get to soon, all of this can change how you hear compared to
I'm interested about the compression.
I hear. If we use this as a very simple example, if I had an IEM in my ears and I had a 24mm ear canal, I might be overly sensitive to the fact that it's got a boost at about 3K. You might put that same IEM in your ear canal, which might be, say, 12 or 15mm long, and listen to it and go, well, Lachlan, what are you talking about? There's no peak there. On the flip side, you might say, yeah, but I really don't like the sound up at around about the 5 or 6K mark, because that's where your sensitivity lies. And so hopefully you're already starting to see why this is an issue, but it's much more complex than just this one graph. So let's take a look at a few more. This next graph.
Maybe one also thing worth talking about at this point is like and again, I don't make headphones. I'm just now getting into measuring headphones. So not as experienced as I am with IEMs in this area, but I feel like a lot of these issues that we're talking about, different ear canal lengths affecting, treble resonance peaks and stuff differently. That's also true of headphones, and that'll also be true of speakers and the real world sound, right? Are those especially true of IEMs? I don't think that part is especially true. Maybe when we get into talking about the pressure, and that's an area I don't think I know anything about, but yeah, let's keep talking.
To look at compressing the ear canal. And so here they took a straight ear canal that was 30 millimeters in length and 8 millimeters in diameter, and they took one measurement with it being left alone and another where they compressed the middle part of it. And as
Wait, hold on. A tube with a length of 30 millimeters and a diameter of 8 millimeters was compressed in the middle part and obtained a response was compared with that of the uncompressed version. So is that 30 millimeter tube that's attempting to simulate an ear canal and suggesting, so like your ear canal is not going to be like this machine tube that is solid all the way around. As I'm understanding what they're talking about here, they're saying that if you've got a 30 millimeter ear canal, it's gonna, let's say it's 8 millimeters on average in terms of its diameter. At some point, it will probably get smaller and wider and smaller. Like this, human bodies are gross, man. But I think that's what this is referring to, and so this is talking about what is the impact of not changing the length of the ear canal, but by adding some compression, which is effectively changing the volume of the ear canal, right? So you could do some math and figure out what 30 millimeters by 8 millimeters equals in terms of volume. And then if you added a compression to that, did he say something about compressing it in the middle part? Yeah. So you compress it in the middle part, you're going to change that volume. But not just change the volume, you're also now creating maybe like a 6 millimeter opening at the middle of it. So you could have a couple of things going on there. One, the volume of the ear canal has changed as well. My layman's understanding of how sound works, right? Sound bouncing around inside your ear canal is now going to interact with a 6 millimeter opening at one point versus just an 8 millimeter opening. Yeah, that makes sense. But again, I think all this would be more or less true of headphones as well.
see, just applying compression, which is the blue line, completely changed the frequency response of that tube. Firstly, it became a lot more irregular, but probably more importantly from a psychoacoustic point of view, and what I mean by that is the sounds we actually hear, the person who has an ear canal that is compressed compared to the one that is straight, assuming they're
Just real quick, jumping into the chat, Water Bottle, I see you say having standardized graphs actually helps with this, doesn't it? Because you can learn what frequencies affect you more. John Peterson saying exactly 100. Yes, I generally agree. I think I don't know that the point that Lachlan is getting to is that graphs are not good. I think though that I think exactly how you described graphs is exactly what they should be used for. Like they should be used for sort of like self-diagnosis, right? Like or diagnostics. Listen to something, look at the graph, start to make interpret it, come to conclusions about how frequencies that you see measured in a standardized way interact with your actual ear, because you are going to be the final variable that matters the most. And I think a lot of people tend to look at graphs as if they're, some objective truth. Like, of course this thing is bassy because it measures with a lot of bass, but I don't know, maybe in someone's ear, the way that it interacts with it might not actually be bassy. And they're not wrong that it's not bassy, because in their ear, it doesn't sound bassy, as kind of an example. Oh, is there someone in Discord that's starting to saying something? Hey, what's up, Bambi?
Yeah, it was me.
Hey, what's up, man?
Yeah, I had a blast yesterday. Like I bought like a bunch of CDs.
Yeah, a bunch of CDs. Just FYI, you're being streamed on YouTube right now.
Oh yeah, it's alright.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna keep watching the video unless you had something to talk about, specifically this all IEM's reviews are wrong video.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. VXA, so I'm spoiling the end. Okay, I haven't gotten to the end yet, but it sounds like VX you have. Let's get to
exactly the same length. The person with that compressed ear canal is getting a boost of about 1.
Oh, and Scott Tarlow, he's saying, what's the point of graphs? They're not objective, or at least predictive. That's why we produce data and do science. Seems like if you conditionally choose to use data, you are missing the point. We need to unpack that. Let's tell me how you would, with that understanding of using data as objective something or other, how would you turn that into a prediction about, what you would like versus what I would like?
To 3 dB at around about the 2.5 kilohertz range. On the flip side, they're also getting a cut at around about the 7 kilohertz range. And so there's going to be a big difference between how two people with these different ear canals would hear a particular IEM. And so
Yeah, and I guess also worth pointing out, like these differences that we're seeing here in this graph are not as significant as the differences that we saw in the last graph, where you were changing the length of the ear canal. But these are, I would say, 2 to 3 dB, especially over a broad range like this, is going to be audible for sure. Well, I don't want to say for sure, but like that should be pretty audible. The only reason I even hesitate, frankly, is because I feel like a lot of planar IEMs have channel imbalances that are not too far off this. This almost looks like a planar graph. And I wouldn't say I hear those channel imbalances, but I do think this would be, if you had an EQ that turned this on and off, you would hear that difference.
said that the length makes a difference, and now also we're adding in that the sense of compression or lack of compression also makes a difference in what you hear. If we then move on and talk about the third factor in ear canal shape, we're now talking about straight versus bent ear canals. Now most people won't have dead straight ear canals, but the degree to which your ear canal bends more or less will directly affect how you hear sounds.
Okay, straight versus bent ear canals. How kinky is your ear canal? I don't think we're going to get this personal, but yeah, that's interesting. So a straight ear canal has that frequency response, and a bend in the ear canal is significantly attenuating the treble in this example.
In this case, we've kept it nice.
Again, though, I think this is also true of headphones.
Again, they've just got a straight canal versus a bent canal. And you can see looking at the graph that bending the canal massively cuts the upper frequencies, but it also changes where there are resonant peaks. So if you had the bent canal in the black line there, you would have a slight peak at around about 2 kilohertz, and then another slight peak just before, I think that's the 5 kilohertz range. So you're going to have those two peaks and then a big drop off. On the other hand, if your canal was more straight, you're going to have a much bigger peak between 2 and 3 kilohertz, and then another peak up around 8 kilohertz. And so as you can see, again, we've got these multiple factors that are changing the way we hear sound. Moving on to another set of data, and this one's actually from real people, so it's quite indicative, I think, as to what we all hear differently.
Ear canal frequency responses, note the significant difference. We all hear a bit differently. So this is what people like plotting out what they hear. That's an interesting experiment, if that's what's going on. He said that these are from actual people, and there's like 3 different graphs that kind of look, I don't know, hand drawn, I suppose. They actually look closer than I would expect, to be honest. Maybe I'll just keep listening, because maybe I'm speculating too much on what this is.
Glance, you might look at these and say, yeah, they're all roughly the same shape, but let's take a moment to look at the specific differences.
Oh, what do you say?
Moving on to another set of data, and this one's actually from real people, so it's quite indicative, I think, as to what we all hear differently. At first glance, you might look at these and say, yeah, they're all roughly the same shape, but let's take a moment to look at the specific differences. What we have here are 3 people, and they've taken measurements of both their left and their right ear canal resonances, or frequency responses, you could call it. And what we can see is that in the first person up the top, this is called subject 5.
So they're saying they took measurements of their ear canal resonances. So maybe this is like using technology similar to what, things like AirPods do, where they try to detect what these variables are inside of your ear and adjust the frequency response with DSP.
You can use an in-ear microphone.
Yeah, you can use an in-ear microphone, but I think it's not going to get to the ear canal resonances, right?
There are canal probes, I think.
Oh, yeah. Gross.
That's how I believe, like, Brew and Cure was able to get some of their results for actual human ear canal, like acoustic impedance.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what they're doing here, more or less, to make their own system more accurate to that. But they you can use probes.
Would you sign up for that?
I don't know if I would.
That sounds
interesting. I'd do it, I guess. Yeah.
I would sign up for that. I am really used to having sting into my ears.
I mean, I can keep the mnemonics. I think I'm okay with this.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so invasive to place a microphone. They're probably going in there with like, tweezers and like, oh my gosh, that sounds nasty. All right, I'm gonna keep watching.
Yeah, it is.
got is the signal has been measured at about a minus 50 dB range, starting from down around, 50 hertz they've started measuring. And so that's going to run pretty much flat all the way up to about 110 hertz before it drops away. And then we get this other peak up the top. So that peak is happening for this person at about
This guy's
10,
ear
9,
is the
8,
most
7,
hi-fi.
about 6 kilohertz, just below 6 kilohertz. And then on we go.
Look at that
Keeping in mind
channel
some of those
balance.
landmarks. So we've got this flat base from 50 through to about 110 hertz. If we now jump down here, notice what we're seeing differently. If we ignore the roll-off in this person's left ear canal, what we can see is that their bass response is generally quite dropped compared to subject 5. So with the same input signal, we're getting a frequency response of minus 60 dB at 50 hertz compared to minus 50 over here. So that's a 10 dB difference. And then instead of it starting flat and then rolling off, subject 6 actually climbs up all the way until they get to around about the 500-600 hertz mark, and then they drop away a bit higher up. So thinking about what these two people would hear if they put an IEM in their ear, subject 5 might find an IEM that they feel is a bit boomy, a bit overdone in the bass. But then if they were to give that same IEM over to subject 6, they might say it's just right, because all of a sudden the IEM is making up for their natural frequency response. And now to be clear, as I understand it, this is not the person's hearing ability. This is not mapping what their brain is doing with the information. It's purely mapping what is going on in terms of the resonance within the ear canal itself. So this person...
That's right.
Can I
Well,
add, like,
we're not getting into what the brain is doing at the end of it. What's up?
Can I add a slight interpretation for people who like trying to read in this graph?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
about the graph that is highlighted right there, the base roll off. I don't know if that is because of the seal of like the transducer producing sound, and like if there are leaks, then the base response are going to drop.
Maybe
I used to
his
think that
maybe his ear leaks.
Yeah, maybe his ears leak, or maybe it's just like a bushy error or something. But the base should not leak in, and so I don't know if I
That's
should assume that like that frequency response is like in a perfect seal situation or not.
well, this is probably an error with the probe, assuming they're using probes here.
Yeah.
You're saying it's probably
I'm-
not an error?
No, it's probably an error with the.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
they're
probably an
using
error.
it.
That's why even somewhere like Harman Research they check the seal before they proceed their measurement and stuff. Just a heads up for people who are like trying to read this data.
On a side note, doesn't this this line look suspiciously like the drop 8XX? All right. We'll keep watching.
it is.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
This is the one HD8XX fan.
And maybe the H adapters is like the actual neutral response we are looking for.
All right, I'm gonna keep going.
Okay.
Subject 6 has an ear canal that boosts the mid-range but rolls off the bass. The person over here who's subject 5, they've got an ear canal that's got fairly solid bass, but then it actually rolls off through the mid-range a bit. If we then come down to subject 3, we see a different picture again. They've got a much higher overall level, starting at minus 40 dB, and I'm assuming that all these were measured with the same input volume. But what this person, subject 3, has is a that actually picks up through the mid-bass and then rolls off down into the mids in much the same way as subject 5 did. So all three of these people are going to be perceiving bass differently, and that's before we even start to look at the treble, which is also a bit different for all three. But before we start looking at the treble here, I want to show...
I'm actually surprised the treble isn't more variable, especially even like left to right. Like I'm surprised to see the left to right treble matching up so well here. I know my ears left and right, like the pinnas are not very symmetrical. Like I can just look at them and I can tell that they're different. I would expect some more asymmetry as we get into the ear canals, and given how much we saw that asymmetry can affect, or just how small variations can create pretty significant differences, I'm actually pretty surprised to see that they look more symmetrical here than I would have guessed.
Different graphs that give us a better understanding of how the treble's being influenced. What we're looking at here is two different graphs focusing on the range from 1 kHz to 20 kHz, and then considering the impact of having compression near the opening of the canal or towards the end of the canal at the eardrum. And specifically what we can see in this top left graph is that if the compression of the ear canal occurs towards the opening of the ear canal, it's going to be influencing a little bit around this 1 to 2K mark, and then again having another significant influence up around the 5, 6, 7K mark. And so if you had a more straight ear canal, you're going to be more sensitive to sounds up in this sort of 5, 6, 7 kHz range, and maybe a little bit less sensitive in this 1 to 2, maybe 2.5 kHz range.
Someone's going to start marketing ear canal stretching apparatuses that you can use to at home reduce the compressions of your ear canal. Don't do that, folks.
What you then might also have, though, is some
I already
compression
have
towards
one
the
of those,
eardrum.
Mark.
And in the case of the compression more towards
Called
the
the
eardrum, you can see
edemotic.
that
I was going to say, is it called an ER4XR? Yeah. I mean, kind of, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised maybe if listening to something like an edemotic would stretch out your ear canal in a way that significantly impacts sound. And now, would that be a thing that is a permanent effect? Sean, you would probably know. Do you think that's a permanent effect? That you might be the person who spent the most time with edemotics in your ear?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if I was invited here, but I don't think that'd be permanent now. Like
No, I mean,
in any serious way.
who knows?
Who
Who
knows?
knows?
I've worn edemotics for 10 plus years, and I don't feel like my ears have changed anatomy.
You might have the fewest compressions of us all.
There you
more
go.
affecting the whole frequency range. And in this case, as you get compression closer to the eardrum, it's going to make you more sensitive to the sounds from, say, 1 kilohertz up to around about 6 or 7 kilohertz. And then it'll start to make you less sensitive to sounds in the 7, 8, 9, and 10 kilohertz range. And so hopefully by now you're getting a really clear
Interesting.
picture of
So this is saying that with more compression, you're more sensitive to sounds in this. I think he was saying 1 to. This is basically like the pin, like ear gain area. It's interesting. So maybe people who are allergic to shout it's because they are they've got compressed ear canals.
every single person's ears
Just
are
throwing
going to be
shade.
hearing a pair of IEMs differently. And potentially headphones and speakers too. But as I said before, I think there's a few other factors going on in terms of the way our pinna might be reflecting different sounds. So for instance, if the pinna is altering how much of the different frequencies are coming into our ear, there could be some natural anatomical filtering going on that's helping, for example, somebody that might also have a highly compressed ear canal near the opening, their pinna might be helping to boost some of these frequencies that are a bit cut. And so I have a theory that the pinna might be offsetting what you're seeing here. And therefore, when you put a pair of IEMs in your ears and you're bypassing the pinna, you're not getting the benefit of that. And that's why in my theory that I've got, we're having much more variation in what we're hearing from IEMs.
Again, I think his conclusion is right. I'm not totally sure I follow the math that he was talking about before that, though.
Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter, so I don't get too caught up on my theory. What matters is that hopefully what you're seeing here is that every single person hears IEMs differently, and it's an anatomical, biological fact. And so let's talk now about what that means for us. Firstly, it means that you hear differently to me and every other reviewer. So you can't 100% trust that when I say X IEM sounds like this, that it's going to be exactly the same for you. But that doesn't mean you should
True.
throw out every single review you've ever read or watched, or stop looking at reviews. What it does mean is that you need to find reviews that you can consistently relate to, either liking or disliking, agreeing or disagreeing, but it's about the consistency. If I consistently say an IEM is too bright and you think it's great, then at least you've got a really good benchmark, and you know that
True.
Okay,
and that I think
this
is too
the
bright.
thing that like I really wish everyone knows, because like this like the statement that every reviewers want you to know, because like when we
Mhm.
listen, it's just our taste. So what we reviewers try to do is like try to show everyone how which music we like all these references stuff. It's all because of this.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the point that Lachlan made there too was really good. It was like, it's not even necessarily that you need to find somebody who has the same tastes as you, although that can be very helpful. But given how variable people's tastes are and how few reviewers there are, like, it's unlikely you're going to find someone that matches you
You
exactly.
find someone that is easy to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who's
That's what
not-
I always try to do when reviewing. Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. I try to as well. I don't know if I succeed, but I definitely try.
Yeah.
just right for you. So it's about finding that sense of consistency as you watch more and more reviews or read reviews from different people. What it also means, though, is that you absolutely need to take all measurements with a huge pinch of salt, and especially measurements from different sources. If you start to get a hand
This is an interesting statement. I don't know, taking measurements with salt. It's I mean, 100% agree with exactly what he's trying to say, but it's just like an interesting way of interpreting what you should be doing with measurements in the first place, right? Again, I think looking at a measurement and saying that the purpose of this measurement is to say exactly what it will sound like in your ear is wrong. So if someone's telling you that that's what a measurement should be doing, yes, take that with a big pinch of salt. But the other understanding is that, like, that's not really how the best way to use measurements. And so figuring out the best way to use measurements isn't necessarily taking them with a big grain of salt. Although, again, I can see why you would come to that description of it, but it's more just like knowing what it is saying and what it's not actually saying, and how there are all these other variables that you do need to account for, and how the measurement is not the final word.
a particular person's measurements and how they relate to you. Again, a bit like what I said before, if you're finding consistency that when their graph looks like this, you like it or you don't like it, that's fine. But you need to keep in mind that different measurement rigs have different designs. Some of them have very short, very straight ear canals, like my mini DSP ears rigs, whilst others are much more anatomically correct. But again, they're not correct to your ear canal, they're correct to some general average ear canal. And so measurements are a great tool for comparing one device to another when they're measured on the exact same rig with the exact same settings, because then you can say that one's got more treble than that one, or that one's got more bass than that one, and that's where it's useful. But trying to pick with...
Yep, that was an important point there too. Talking about, comparing measurements from, measuring two IEMs on the same rig versus measuring two IEMs measured on two separate rigs. In the former case, measuring them on the same rig, you can start to make some, pretty decent conclusions about which one has more elevated bass, more elevated treble, again, with the caveat that it's going to have to interact with your ear at the end of that. But if you're taking a measurement from my rig and comparing it to a measurement from Bambu's rig, there's going to be some other variables there. Not only, well, I guess in this case where we are probably using, roughly the same standard, but there's just a lot of variability in the measurement rigs that we use. Mine is not built to a.
That's why the board I built, I don't implement the function to cross comparison between rigs because of literally of this.
Yeah.
Like you need because our rigs are just like a clone of like a grass rig, so
right.
It has some inconsistency in quality control as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
right, and that can't be understated either. Like it's not a small difference between these unit to unit.
Yep.
So yeah, if you cannot if we in this case since we all measures, but we cannot assure the accuracy of our measurement, then
you can definitely see the inaccuracy when you look at the compensation graph you made of IEF.
Yeah. But we cannot assure the accuracy. We have to assure the consistency. That's why that's why in every measurement you should concern about the consistency of the measurement database than the accuracy. That comes later, at least for people who are trying to read graph.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that probably could use its own video discussion, huh?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's take this one home.
Like an IEM based on one standalone measurement where you may not know the ins and outs of the measurement rig and the calibration applied, that's just asking for trouble because your ear canal is going to be so different to the measurement rig. That also leads us to the fact that things like the Harman target curve are only somewhat helpful because that target curve cannot possibly take into account how your ears hear the sound. And a case in point is me. I generally find that most things tuned to the Harman target curve closely have too much upper mid-range emphasis. And that's not to say that those...
I feel like that's true of everybody. It's weird. I haven't found anyone that says that they love the Harman target. I mean, it's probably a good starting point, and it's better than a lot of tunings that are common, like the Sony XM3s and stuff like that. But
even I tuned out the Harman target a bit. So, and I'm probably the one who listened the shoutiest stuff around here.
Right.
Tuned wrongly or the Harman target curve is wrong is to say that for my ears and the resonance of my ear canals, that specific tuning isn't ideal. And so this is another one where it's important for you to work out if that is a target curve that works for you or if it's not. And there's no right and wrong there. It's about understanding how your personal hearing differs from everybody else's. And so my final point as I wrap this video up is to say that the key takeaway for me is to not hesitate to stick with exactly what you love, no matter what anyone else says. If you have an eye...
True.
You love and someone else says it's a boomy, bassy mess and you don't hear it that way, it's probably because your ear canal is different from theirs. And in other words, they've never heard the IEMs with your ears, they can't comment. So stick with what you love, ignore people that criticize you for what you do love, ignore reviews that tell you that it's not as good as what you think it is because they've never heard it with your ears. And so hopefully this video has given you a really good sense of why IEM reviews in particular and IEM measurements in particular have to be treated very carefully, but also given you some ideas as to how you can use them effectively. And specifically, it's about getting a benchmark. It's about getting a point of consistent reference so you can understand what works for you and doesn't work for you by understanding how your hearing specifically differs from the reviewer or the measurements you're seeing. And so I hope you found this video useful and informative. If you have, I'd love it if you hit the like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you've got any questions,
Lachlan,
do post them down in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. And remember, I've put a link through to the full article in the description
so
you can check that out if you want to know more detail.
Please.
For now, though, let me leave you to the music. So happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.
All right, cool. So yeah, in short, I agree. I agree. All IEM reviews are wrong, and this channel is now over. This has been a nice run, but Super Review is over. The IEM reviews are wrong, and there's no use going on. No, again, I don't think that was
There's
the. Sorry, that was not the conclusion he came to. What were you saying?
they actually there's one more extent conclusion that this more of the behavior of people who tends to get into audio gears. So the conclusion of this video is that like you should not like be bothered by people who like criticize you for the gears you like.
100%.
Please, please, this is different from giving a recommendation as it is gospel. There's a really big difference from that. And like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of people who doesn't recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a really good point. Is it like, this is specifically talking about reviews, which ostensibly is talking about reviewers like you and I, but reviews can come in the form of somebody on, Headfire, Amazon comments or something like that saying this is the thing that you should get. And yeah, to your point, it's like advocating for something as if the way that you like it is exactly the way that other people was going to like it is, if they don't have the experience of hearing a bunch of different things, they might be like, that might actually work really well, right? So let's take the Sony XM3s as an example, the headphone. A lot of people that buy those headphones are probably not audiophiles who have a lot of experience listening to a lot of different headphone gear. And so when, a YouTuber says, hey, the Sony XM3s are the best headphones out there, someone buys them, they probably are happy enough with them that they're not going to question the fact that they are the best headphone that you can buy. But I think they sound like garbage. And I think a lot of people here in this chat would probably agree that they don't sound good.
Yeah, so it's actually like read every audio reviews with a beginning of in my opinion, please. And for people who like giving our recommendation, please also make sure that it is your opinion. Like people has to know it is your opinion, and they
Yep.
still have to experiment to find their very sound. Like
Yeah.
an interesting thing I tried to do this around this time is that I actually like had like somewhat a consultation with my musician artist friend. And like I just and what I do when I can and what I do when come to earphone, which is like an earphone store in Japan, is that I give him like some IEMs that I think that are good for him to listen, and I don't comment on anything. I only like try to comment on when he's trying to express his opinion on how he listens to the device, and try to make sense trying to have him making sense of what he's hearing. That's the approach I think that is a really good way to go when you try to recommend. I let people experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And unfortunately, that's a thing that's difficult to do if you're like just trying to get into the hobby and you don't happen to either be near an audio shop or have a friend that has a bunch of stuff that you can demo, is that you do have to kind of go on what you read on the internet. And I think the point that you made about you just really do have to figure it out on your own to some degree is totally true. And maybe the takeaway from that is like that, as best as possible, avoid analysis paralysis of like trying to get all, like, for sure, go out there and get as much information as you can within reason. But like, you're going to get to a point where you've got, 3 or 4 different options, and you've got someone telling you this is the best option. You got someone else saying this is the best option. And it's not that they're wrong or right. They just have different perspectives, and which one is going to be right for you, really the only way to know is to hear it for yourself.
I would
Yeah,
say if this is strictly aimed at like specs reader and like specs nerd, I think every hobby have that too.
Right. Yeah. Oh, so you think that maybe there's like a recommendation that you would like, if you knew that somebody could like self-select or self-identify as a specs min-maxer, that you'd be like, all right, this is
Like
the
in
one to get.
cameras.
Yeah. Cameras are a lot like that. And maybe cameras are a little bit easier because it feels like the ways that you can measure the performance of a camera are less subjective. I mean,
I
with
think
there, go ahead.
I think one interesting thing could be up to like cars and motorcycles and about their
Mm-hmm.
handling.
Mm-hmm.
That thing, there's no metrics of how good a car or bike handles.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, you can't measure that. Really,
Right.
you have to
You
ride the
can
bike
though.
for
Yeah,
yourself.
you need to have a feel for you need to have a feel for it.
Yeah. And VXA, so you were saying you can though. I mean, I think there are like similar to the audio game, there are metrics that you can measure. You can measure skid pad grip, you can measure body roll and stuff like that. But, you know, there is still that perceptual end at, you know, that at
Yeah,
where,
there's a lot of subjectivity to it.
yeah.
I guess like it could perform well, it could like spit out good numbers, but like perhaps if like the steering assist is like acting in a weird way, or like the car feels twitchy, you can't like really measure that.
Right. Or it
I
kind of
know,
I
reminds me of
believe
the
like
Nissan GTR, which people, you know, referred to as like obviously a really good performing vehicle that some people said it handled or it had like dead handling or it didn't feel very connected, right? And like that's a very subjective sense.
this almost calling for a top gear version of audio files.
Oh man, what's the most ridiculous version of Top Gear that we can turn into an audio show?
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah,
Certainly.
I could actually see that being a thing.
I would
Well,
participate.
my favorite episode of Top Gear is when they rode little motorcycles from the south to the north of Vietnam.
Oh no, the Vietnam episode.
It was so
Oh,
good.
yeah.
We could do
Oh,
that. We
yeah.
could do like a tour of audio shops up and down,
It
you
is
know,
possible to
Southeast
drive
Asia.
from south to north of Vietnam. My family has done that. Like we rode the car. Well, it's not a motorcycle, but a car. But from Hanoi to the Ho Chi Minh City. So
Yeah, I think that was
it
the
was
trip
really
they took. Cool.
That was a good episode.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
a good episode.
It's my favorite. Real quick, I
think-
did want to pull up my goofy slides. Can you still see this on the Discord?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah, I can see it.
It's probably pretty small. Let me do this to make it a little bit bigger. Oh, did you just? Okay. Okay, cool. So these are my goofy slides, and I think this would be my explanation for what Lachlan was getting at in terms of because I kept mentioning, right? He was talking about how ear canal lengths will impact the perceived frequency responses and stuff like that, and all that really is kind of true for headphones as well as speakers or real life in general, right? But I think he was right in saying that IEMs are kind of inherently more variable in terms of perception than those other things, and I think this is my explanation for why. And just FYI, I'm not a scientist. This is just me kind of thinking through what makes sense to me. But here we've got basically, you know, a diagram of an ear, and again, I've kind of got it, you know, broken out into 3 stages where you've got the pinna, the ear gain, you've got the core ear canal, and then there's like sort of like the deeper ear canal, or sort of like the ear canal resonance, which is right past the pinna, and then deeper into the ear canal, right? And so as he was talking about, right, let's say you start from outside of the ear and you've got something like a flat measuring speaker, or you've got, you know, actual real world noise. There are things in the world that make noise that are not transducers, believe it or not. But let's say these things are producing sound that is, you know, a flat frequency response, right? As I am talking into this room, I am a flat frequency response. I have no EQ or no tuning. But that all enters into the ear canal, right? Or sorry, not the ear canal, into the pinna region. And this is where, as Lachlan was talking about, the pinna tends to amplify frequencies in sort of the 1 to 4 kilohertz region. So that's kind of what this is illustrating. It's like you start with a flat frequency response and it hits the pinna and it gets adjusted like this, right? Where now you start amplifying that upper mid-range. Then you get into the ear canal, and there's ear canal resonances here. And here, this is what Lachlan was talking about there being a lot of variability here with the ear canal resonances. Here I just kind of, loosely said that it's amplified the treble, but that's a very rough approximation of what's going on there. But you can kind of see how, you started with this flat frequency response coming out of a flat measuring speaker. It got amplified by your ear, got into the ear canal, and the treble frequencies got amplified even further. And then that hits the dome, that hits the brain, and your brain is interpreting that as neutral, right? As your friend is talking to you in a room, as a car drives by, that is neutral, natural, realistic sound. But again, it's kind of going through these amplification stages to get to your ear. When you listen to a headphone, an on-ear headphone, that goes on top of, or let's say around the ear headphone, that goes on top of the ear, and it's still going to interact with the pinna, right? So if you have a flat measuring headphone, and say you measured this not on a rig like a Gross rig that Kryn uses or anything like that, but you measured it on some other rig that was not trying to simulate an ear, it could measure exactly perfectly flat, but then it interacts with the ear canal and it gets this amplification, right? And then it still goes through these stages and then gets interpreted as neutral. An IEM, however, bypasses this stage, right? So here we've got an example, the Moondrop Chew. That bypasses the ear amplification. And what that means is that the IEM has to have this amplification built into the frequency response. Now, where this starts to get dicey, and this is where I think Lachlan's right, is that people's perception is going to be more variable with IEMs than with something like an over-ear headphone, is that by baking this amplification into the frequency response of something like the Moondrop Chew, for example, they are making assumptions about what this pinna would have done to a flat frequency response, right? Assuming they're going for a neutral tune. This IEM is making the assumption that your pinna is going to generate this frequency response. And your pinna is different than mine, and mine is different than yours. Mine is not a Gross pinna. And again, my left and right pinnas, even like I can just visibly look at them and tell that they're different. So there's going to be some variability there, but this is making an assumption that that variability is some sort of standard, right? And then that still hasn't even gotten into the ear canal resonances. So then my next slide is showing something like an etymotic, which inserts deeply. It actually bypasses the ear canal, at least sort of like the outer ear canal resonances, and attempts to get that frequency response just straight to the dome. But again, it's making assumptions about what sorts of amplifications and resonances might happen inside of an ear canal. And so, if they're trying to simulate exactly what's going on with this flat measuring speaker, they will have the ear gain built into it, as well as the treble resonances built into it. And then hopefully it hits the ear, or it hits the brain, and it is interpreted as neutral. But again, that's making assumptions about the ear canal. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, again, these resonances that are happening in the ear canal, they're going to happen regardless of you listening to an IEM or listening to a headphone or listening to a speaker. But where the variability really comes into play is that an IEM that fits into the ear canal entrance like this is making assumptions about your pinna, and then an IEM like the etymotic ER4 that fits even deeper into your ear is making assumptions not only about your pinna, but also about your ear canal resonances. And ergo, that's where we're going to get to people completely perceiving these things different. Because if this assumes my ear looks like a Gross ear and I've got small ears or something like that, it's going to be just wildly different than what I would expect to hear if I were listening to something like a flat measuring speaker or headphone.
Basically,
And
we perceive of different. We hear the same thing, just perceiving it differently.
I mean, yes and no. When they're talking about like the amplifications that our anatomy plays, if you again were to put a microphone in your ear canal, which apparently is a thing, even though that sounds entirely wrong, If you were putting a microphone into your ear canal, you can measure that, different things are reaching your eardrum that are reaching mine. But again, if we're listening to a flat measuring speaker, or we're listening to, a human being talking to us in person, all those resonances and changes and stuff that are happening from your anatomy are then hitting your brain and being like, that just becomes what normal sounds like to you, neutral or natural or whatever kind of word you want to put on it.
Yeah. There's no argument here.
Okay.
That video wasn't like a really informative piece for every entry people who are trying to read, who are trying to get into this audio file stuff.
Yeah,
At least
absolutely.
on the scientific side.
Yep, absolutely.
Has anyone here looked into what audio manufacturers use to determine the pinna gain that they use? So, for instance, my theory would be if you have a flat measuring speaker, that can be based on actual sound, has nothing to do with your ear whatsoever. It's just based on what sound reproduction is. Once it hits your ear and your pinna, and it's amplified, and then your ear resonance, all that kind of stuff. At that point, you're taking a personal perspective from it. Like you said, that's like the person's normality. So what if they took 1,000 people, set them in front of speakers that were neutral, and then had them test earphones with different pinnas and said which one sounds like the speaker? Obviously, it would be somewhat subjective because people aren't perfect at expressing their opinions. But you know what I mean? That might be one way to kind of get an average measurement of various pinnas, and you average them all together, and then boom, there you have like an standard. But is there something that anyone in here is aware of that they actually use to do that? Like, is there a method they come
Well,
to design these?
I
yeah, I mean,
mean,
they're standards
I
like
think Harmon tried that.
the Gross and Kimar and stuff.
Isn't that Harmon?
That's literally Harmon.
That's literally Harmon.
What I
Yeah.
just said is Harmon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just describe how
So
Harmon
Sean Olive did that basically?
Yeah, they
Yeah, pretty
did
much.
that. I mean, there are more complex stuff. Like they divide by audience with their trained listener and like casual listener. But like everything you said is roughly the same methodology.
Gotcha.
See,
That makes
'cause, yeah,
sense.
like,
I mean,
go ahead.
there's only going to be so much you can do with the fact that everyone's different. You have to make some assumptions. You have to make some generalities. Other than like Apple or somebody where maybe you could come up with some acoustic measurement system in the earphone that adapts. But even then, it's like you said, based on assumptions as to what it should be compensating.
Yeah, and
What I would be really
I was just going to mention
interesting-
quickly, so not to complicate this even further, we haven't even talked about the word taste, personal taste, right? We're like all this conversation is kind of on the assumption that we're trying to recreate something that is neutral or natural sounding, and like that's not everyone's goal.
Taste you change a lot.
What's that?
Can I?
I still want to get back to the Harmon stuff a bit.
Yeah.
I would like find it really interesting if we can see like the Harmon publish the target between their trained listeners and as well as their untrained listeners, because that would make like a really interesting comparison.
My knowledge, the only difference is bass.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, I mean we all know that like the conclusion that the Harmon research the research has done is that the variation on bass, but like I want to see like the whole full data, because I feel like after that they just average everything. You can kind of get my idea, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm gonna go open another can of worms of burning your brain as well.
Yeah. So
Can I speak to your comment on preference?
Yeah, we can speak on preference now.
Because one of the things that I've noted, and Mark and I have talked extensively about all the different earphones that we like and how they vary and whatnot. But over the last 20 years, probably my preference for bass has drastically decreased. to the point where I can listen to something like an ER4S or even an ER4B and think it sounds good bass wise. But even though ER4S is one of my all-time favorite IEMs, I might listen to something like the Dunu EST 112, and there are times where I much prefer it just because maybe I just want to have a more relaxing listen and not have to like analyze things as much. So those are pretty different sounding IEMs.
Very.
And I would argue that I like them both equally. So that just speaks to the whole preference thing, because I could say, well, this target's perfect, but next week I might not listen to anything but the EST 112, or the week after that it might be the ER4B or whatever. So it definitely plays a huge role on my part as to, the enjoyment of the music changes based on my mood and other factors. So yeah, just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna say people should look at reviews relatively. So I would say,
You want to
perhaps
elaborate?
like for me, I would say like I have areas and choose and stuff, and I could look at your review and like see relatively how would you review them, like how would you say about them, how would you say about their bass, their trap, and that you could establish a relative, well, bridge between what you perceive and what the other person is perceiving. I guess that is a better way to look at reviews rather than black and white data.
Right. It's like almost like using a couple of data points to triangulate something like an interpretive bridge. It would be interesting if like maybe this is a thing that KZ can do. I feel like KZ is in a position where they could do this. Like sell a package of 3 IMs that become like the standard of 3 different tweaks on tonality, and then you could have somebody else interpret those 3 different. Maybe it's a cheap pack, right? The idea is that can we get a few different data points in the hands of somebody for inexpensive that they can listen to for themselves, and then hear, as you were saying, hear someone else give their description of it, so that and then you can start bridging and being able to interpret other things that they'll say about other IEMs.
I don't know. It feels too much like a custom tuning service, which I think there are some manufacturers does. I think Sony does that to an extent. Like Sony, I think Sony actually like custom tune their custom IEM based on based on people requests.
Mm-hmm.
I know in Vietnam there used to be someone who did that also. That's Aya Audio, but you guys probably don't know that. But I know there was someone.
I think Casey's already doing like 3-in-1 deals right now. I think last time I looked at one of their products, they have literally like 3 IEMs in one box with like bass tune, middle tune, trap tune, that thing.
Yeah, I think that was the EDX.
I think
the
so.
EDA.
No, it's the EDA. EDX is still like very bassy.
Do the tunes actually sound different?
I have.
I mean, we can whip out the
them.
board right now. Let me whip out because I have the permission to use my board in different channels.
Oh, okay. Can you do it in
the
voice
EDA
text?
product.
So
ahead,
if
Juan.
you say, if you want to get the idea of like relatively reviewing things, maybe you should review the ZSN Pro. I think people still buying that for some reason.
Well, it's like $17.
It's odd that I come to new people going into IEMs and it's all like ZKZ.
Yep.
There's still very much relevance for some
Good
reason.
thank Dankpods for that.
Dankpods. Man, the KZ connection to the mainstream though, it existed before Dankpods. I don't know.
I believe
what
so.
Pipeline's like.
Yeah, I show. Yeah, if you guys look at the voice chat in the voice channel, I already bring up the graph.
I'm still confused as to like the product pitch for the EDA.
Yeah, they actually have different measurement results. So
Yeah, I can see that. Like
balance,
there's
the
there's
balance,
difference, but
yeah, the balance. Nothing. The high res version, they push the upper mids and treble. The base version, they make it a really V shape.
Okay.
like did they really have to just include 3 whole like make a product package of 3 whole earphones to achieve
Yeah,
this?
I
Just like you're
guess,
just gonna use one of them.
Well, I mean, I
guess,
think this is interesting that they did it this way.
It is.
yeah,
but
because the
I'm
common
sure
is
there's
that
another
like
way.
you guys get a switch and then the switch usually fiddles with the crossover. And yeah, but like then again, there isn't much. There isn't a lot of IEMs that like that's done really well in terms of like using the switch to fiddle with the
Right.
crossover. There are only a few of them.
Right. Yeah.
But I think
Usually
just
the
use
Switch doesn't do
nozzles.
too much.
I
Sorry, what was
do
that?
wonder, like, if
Uh,
it's either a filter or like a crossover board, and like, why would they just do a dip switch or just filter pack, but rather like 3 IEMs in one? I
You
do
guys are-
wonder.
I mean, honestly, you are going to shove a lot of things into a shell. So
You
if
guys
that is
are-
not
yeah.
an option, then yeah, get three the same shell and tune it like differently rather than just trying to show a switch. I think that works out if you're taking shell design into account.
You guys
Mm.
are digging too deep into this. A
I
dip,
guess
yeah,
it's
like
Yeah,
a
we're
dip switch is a dip switch and multiple shells are probably a little bit more expensive than just a screw-in nozzle attachment
yeah, pretty
that you
much.
can swap out.
It's just
They could have just done that. It probably would have been
direction that you're
just as
going.
effective.
I
But
don't
then you
know.
don't
I've
have a
just
collection of IEMs
feel
at the
like
end.
I
Yeah,
just
then I have a
feel
whole
like
bunch of
they've
values you don't
just
need.
find a way to triple the amount of waste in one in one package.
That's what it feels like. It's like they just had a whole bunch of maybe it was just losing the amount of space that a pile of like drivers took in their warehouse was more worth it to them than like making custom nozzles or whatever.
Okay,
Just here,
we're
dump them all
getting
on the
a little
customer.
bit off topic now. So yeah, let's get back to the topic we are trying to talk about.
Indeed, I could see that could be a viable way for people to get into, like, knowing what they are hearing. Certainly.
Yeah, I was at one point playing around with the idea of using the Sony EX15 and the JVC Gummy as like a recommendation for people to start with, and from there kind of calibrate where your preferences might be, because those are 2 IEMs you can get for like $8 each. So for like around $15, you can get 2 IEMs that have pretty significantly different frequency responses, and you could start to, say like, oh, from this one, I wish it had more of that, or from this one, I wish it had less of that. And maybe you actually start triangulating something useful. Let me pull up the graphs real quick.
The caveat is both of them are shouty, though.
Yeah, I mean, in their own way, right? So and then the other caveat too is that it seems like there's pretty significant unit variance between them. So
I mean,
that
like
confounds it a little
nice
bit.
way-
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, a really nice way about it, like a really alternative way for people to do about it, for free with every earphone that they want. It just mess up with the equalization. I mean, we can make like a preset that like change the bass, change the treble, and just let people apply it, and then they will try to switch in everything, because like I think it's easier for them to hear like the perception on how the sound change in real time, rather than just like trying between different 2 IEMs. So at least they know the frequency response and how it affects the sound.
Yeah. On that note, Vanview, maybe we should talk about doing this. This is a thing I've wanted to build into the CrinGraph software, but it's beyond my skills. Maybe you can do it. Maybe we can recruit Rosa into helping us. But wouldn't it be cool if
Yeah,
you could
Rosa is
use
probably-
If you could use this EQ tool to tune an IEM to another frequency response and then play like a music track from your local computer, so you could like hear what it would sound like with your own music using that IEM.
Yeah, on that note, I really want to rewrite the tool, the backend of the tool when I have the time to do that. It's a challenging task, but like I feel like the current code base it makes it like really challenging to maintain.
Yes.
It is a challenge to maintain it. Like all of what we can do is the front end and try to do modification here and there. But like if you saw what I have to struggle with fixing some bugs, you already know how much I want to like at least like bring the code base to a more manageable state for everyone to contribute easily. So I really want to get that done first before we try to do like the project like you were talking, because like if it gets to that point, we probably can publish it as a standalone apps, which would be like really, really cool to happen.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, it's now 10:30. I mean, you guys can all keep chatting about this, but I think I am gonna call it an evening. Thank you all for joining here on the Discord server, and for the folks that are in live chat on YouTube. Sorry, I didn't pay a ton of attention to the live chat. I was watching it in the corner of my eye. It seemed like there was some pretty good conversation going on there, but thank you all for hanging out. And again, if you haven't already, head over to Lachlan's YouTube channel, give him a subscribe, start watching his content. Because again, I clickbaited this title, but for the most part, pretty much agree with everything he said. IEM reviews are wrong. We just got to cope. And I guess with that said, have a good evening, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.